Assalamu alaikum and good morning to all. My name is Muhammad Akil. Today, my group will be presenting our POPBL Statistics Group Project. Our topic today will be on the daily expenses of a CFS student. We have gathered over 75 participants from various mahala, which includes Biruni, Zarawi, Aisha, Fatima, Asda, and Umama. The sampling technique we use is convenient sampling, which is finding conveniently available participants to participate in our survey. Now, of those 75 participants, we have 45 females and 30 males. To discuss further on about this discussion, I will pass it on to Brother Ani.
Hi, my name is Anik and I will be discussing the raw data, the group frequency distribution table, the histogram, and the frequency polygon. So first, I'll be talking about the raw data. The raw data here, we have collected 75 responses from male and female students of CFS on their spendings, on their daily spendings on food. Here, we have separated the raw data into 6 different classes. The first being 3 to 5, second being 6 to 8, third being 9 to 11, fourth being 12 to 14, the next one being 15 to 17, and the last one being 18 to 20. So from this from these classes of data, we can find the class width using this formula right here, which is the range over the number of classes. Now, moving on to the group frequency distribution table. All right, so now I'll be talking about the group frequency distribution table. So right here, we have the class boundary, frequency, cumulative frequency, and the calculated values, fx and fx squared. So from the data we have right here, we can tell that the class that has the highest frequencies are 9 to 11 and 12 to 14. And the lowest, and the class with the lowest frequency is 3 to 5 with only 4 respondents. Whereas the classes with the highest frequencies have 18 respondents. So now I'll be moving on to histogram. So now I'll be talking about the histogram. The histogram is a continuous graph where each bar represents the frequency of each class. So the class boundary is plotted on the x-axis, whereas the frequency is plotted on the y-axis. From this graph, we can virtually interpret that the middle ranges 8.5 to 11.5 and 14.5 and 17.5 have the highest frequency, which means the highest amount of respondents expenditures, whereas the low and high ends have smaller frequency, and that means we have less students expenditures on those ends. So now I'll be moving on to the last graph that I'll be presenting, which is the frequency polygon. All right, so now I'll be talking about the frequency polygon. The frequency polygon connects the midpoints of each class with lines, providing a smooth visual representation of the distribution. Just like the histogram, it peaks around the midpoints of intervals 10 and 16 corresponding to the most frequent expenditure ranges. This polygon helps us identify trends and patterns, such as the concentration of the spending ranges in the middle and the tapering off at both ends. Right, now I'll be passing it on to Brother Umar.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Wan Umar. Now I'll be talking about the OJAF graph. This right here is the OJAF graph, which is about the daily food expenses. The graph right here is about the cumulative frequency or the number of students over the money spent in RM. Using the OJAF graph, we extract the data, and using this data, we can calculate the mean, mode, median, variance, and standard deviation. In mean, we can calculate the average money spent of every student in CFS using this formula. Inputting the data in and using this formula, we get 12.52. In median, there's another formula we use, which is here. Using this formula, we get 12.6, which is the median. And for mode, well, is the most repeated value in a set of data. But since we are using a table, we use this formula shown over here. Using this formula, we get 10.68.
Umar here. The data is bimodal, which means there are two modes, the first being 10.68, while the other being 15.32.
68. And there's another two, which is variance and standard deviation. For variance, the formula we use over here is this one. Using this, we get 17.69.
Umar here again. The data is not 17.69, it is 18.25.
And standard deviation is the square root of variance. So doing that, we get 4.23.
Again, it's not 4.23, the standard deviation is 4.27.
Now, I'll be passing on to the next person.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Azam. So now, I will explain about the pie chart. Title, Time Student Order Food Outside CFS, illustrate how frequently CFS students order food from outside source each week. The majority, 76%, order food only once a week, indicating that most students prefer to limit their outside food consumption. A smaller portion, 42%, order food twice a week, showing a moderate frequency. Meanwhile, only 1% of students order food 3 times a week, and another 1% order 4 times a week. And in additional, very small percentage, approximately 1% of less, order food more than 3 times a week. This data suggests that while occasional food ordering is common among CFS students, frequent ordering is rare. Factors such as a cost, convenience, or satisfaction with food options at CFS might contribute to this trend of low external food ordering frequency among students. Quick food option at CFS might contribute to this trend of low external food ordering frequency students. So now I will explain about the bar chart illustrate how students perceive the affordability of food at CFS on a scale 1 to 5, with 5 being the most affordable. Out of 75 respondents, the majority, 40 students, which is 53.3%, rate the food at 4, suggesting they find it quite affordable. Additionally, 21 students, which is 28, gave a rating of 3, reflecting a moderate or neutral view. Meanwhile, 13 students, which is 17.3%, rate the food at 5, indicating they find it very affordable. Only one student, which is 1.3%, rate it at 2, and non-rate at a 1, which implies that very few students consider the food unaffordable. Overall, the data shows that the most students perceive the food at CFS to be reasonable or high affordable. Okay, the next is the pie chart summarizes the overall satisfaction of 75 individuals with their available food option. The largest segments, comprising 56% of respondents, reported being satisfied, indicating a general positive sentiment. A substantial portion, which is 33.3%, expressed a neutral stance, suggesting neither satisfaction nor dissatisfaction. Only a small fraction, which is 10.7%, indicating strong satisfaction. Notably, neither the dissatisfied nor the strongly dissatisfied categories received any response as the segments are absent from the chart. This distribute highlights that while a majority are content, a considerable number remain different, and a small segment is particularly pleased with the food choice.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Abbas and I'll be presenting our last three graphs. So, this is our first graph over here, the bar graph. We will be showing how many times a student eats in a day. So, looking at our student meal habits, there's a strong trend. You see, Over here we can see 53 students eat 2 meals a day, while 13 students eat the traditional 3 meals a day, and only 8 students eating once, with only one more student who eats more than 3 times a day. This really highlights that for this group of 2 meals a day, the most common pattern, which would be the balance of student in terms of affordability and fulfillment. Okay, moving on to our next graph. This bar chart here shows the factors that influences the choice of food for students at CFS. Now, our data shows that financial consideration are the top factor for choosing a meal at CFS, with 31 students picking budget, and taste coming at second with 16 students, and also availability, followed by availability with 15 students. Now, interestingly though, health is at the least prioritized, with only 13 students picking, 13 students selecting health. This tells us that practical needs often outweigh health concerns in their food choices, as students often pick budget over any other factors. Okay, moving on to our last pie graph here. As we can see, this pie graph illustrates when students generally fast in a month. Now, we can see with the highest frequency here, 28% of students generally do not fast during a month. However, after those who do actually participate by fasting, we can see that the highest frequency of students who do fast is 27% who fast in the middle of the month. This is then followed by 15% of students who fast during the end of the month, with only the smallest participation of 5% of students fast at the beginning of the month.
Okay.
Not yet.
Thank you, everyone. Now that we've come to my part, in which I will be talking about the conclusion. So, what we can gather from all this data that all of my group mates have spoken about is that we can find an average of 12.5 RM per day spent by students in CFS. We can also find from the data that we have gathered that students mainly fast during the middle of the month and the end of the month. What we can deduct from this data is the fact is that they fast mainly to save money. So with this, I hope that students, no matter in which universities, would learn and spend their wealth wisely. Thank you, and that is all from our group.